My father, a man I once looked up to, demanded I return the purse. He stood there, his face a mask of cold fury, utterly convinced I had stolen it. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was the truth behind that purse. A truth that would shatter our family, expose a web of deceit, and ultimately change my life forever. This isn't just a story about a purse. It's about the raw, burning resentment that festered inside me, the shocking betrayal that tore my world apart, and my relentless obsession to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Imagine feeling completely invisible, constantly overshadowed, never quite good enough. That was my reality growing up in our seemingly perfect suburban home in Ohio. My older sister, Clara, was the golden child, effortlessly brilliant and charming. I, on the other hand, was always just there. My dad, a respected local businessman, adored Clara. His pride in her was palpable, while his interactions with me felt perfunctory, a duty rather than a joy. This subtle but constant favoritism fueled a quiet resentment within me, a deep ache of being unloved and overlooked. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering reinforced this painful dynamic. I longed for his approval, but it always felt just out of reach. Then came the summer I turned 16. Clara had just graduated high school with honors, heading to an Ivy League college on a full scholarship. Our parents threw a lavish party inviting half the town. Amidst the joyous chaos, I spotted it, a stunning vintage alligator skin purse tucked away in my mother's closet. It wasn't just any purse. It was an antique, a family heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother, a woman I barely remembered but whose strength and independence were legendary in our family. My mother had always promised it to me, a silent acknowledgement of my own budding sense of style and appreciation for history. Seeing it there, I felt a flicker of hope, a tangible connection to a legacy that felt entirely mine, something separate from Clara's dazzling achievements. I carefully took it out, marveling at its intricate clasp and the soft, aged leather. It felt like a piece of my identity, a promise of a future where I, too, could shine. I placed it carefully in my own closet, intending to ask my mother about it later. But later never came. The next morning my father stormed into my room, his face contorted with an anger I had rarely seen directed at me. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Where is Clara's graduation gift?" My heart plummeted. Clara's graduation gift? My mother had explicitly told me it was mine. The shock of his accusation, the venom in his tone, was a physical blow. He accused me of jealousy, of trying to ruin Clara's moment. He wouldn't listen to my frantic explanations. He called me a thief, a liar, and ordered me to return what he believed I had stolen. His words cut deeper than any physical wound. The resentment I had harbored for years solidified into something far more potent, a searing sense of betrayal, not just by Clara but by my own father, who so readily believed the worst of me. I stood my ground, refusing to return a purse that was rightfully mine, a purse that now symbolized everything wrong with my family. The ensuing argument was explosive, a raw, ugly confrontation that left me feeling utterly alone and misunderstood. That day, something shifted inside me. The quiet, overlooked girl began to fade, replaced by a fierce determination. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had been wronged, and I swore to myself, in that moment of profound hurt, that I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. My father's demand, my refusal, it wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning of my relentless pursuit of justice. A journey that would lead me down a path I never imagined, towards revelations that would shake the very foundations of our lives. What I discovered next about that purse, about my family, and about myself will astound you. The familiar scent of my dad's Old Spice aftershave hung heavy in the air, a suffocating cloud that always preceded an argument. My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 24 I still lived under his roof, a situation that felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. He stood by the antique mahogany dining table, his back ramrod straight, a crisp Wall Street Journal clutched in one hand. The silence stretched, thick and pregnant with unspoken tension, a common prelude to his pronouncements. I knew what was coming. I always did. He cleared his throat, a sound that always made my stomach clench. "Eleanor," he began, his voice devoid of warmth. "We need to discuss this unfortunate situation." He didn't even look at me, his gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the bay window overlooking our perfectly manicured backyard in Greenwich, Connecticut. The purse. The word hung in the air, a tiny, innocuous object that had somehow become the focal point of my entire existence. It was a vintage Chanel flat bag, a gift from my grandmother before she passed, a piece of her vibrant spirit I clung to fiercely. Not just any bag, but her bag, a tangible link to the only person who ever truly saw me, truly loved me without conditions. My dad, however, saw it as an extravagance, a symbol of my supposed irresponsibility. He believed I should be focusing on my future, on a career in finance like his, not on sentimental trinkets. He'd made it clear countless times that I needed to sell it, to invest the money, to be practical. "Dad, we've been over this," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with a defiance I rarely dared to show. "It's not for sale. It's Grandma Rose's." He finally turned, his eyes, usually a cool, calculating blue, now burning with a familiar chilling anger. "Eleanor, you are an adult. It's time you started acting like one. That bag is worth a considerable sum. Money that could be put to good use, invested wisely, instead of sitting in your closet gathering dust." He gestured dismissively towards the stairs, towards my room, as if the bag itself was an affront to his sensibilities. "It's an asset, not a relic. An asset. That's all he ever saw in anything, in anyone. People, possessions, relationships, all reduced to their monetary value, their potential for profit. He never understood the emotional currency of things, the stories they held, the memories they evoked. To him, my grandmother's purse was just leather and hardware, a number on a balance sheet. To me, it was a piece of her soul, a connection to a love that felt increasingly distant in this cold, sterile house. "It's not just about the money, Dad," I tried to explain, my voice trembling slightly. "It's about Grandma Rose. It's the last thing I have of hers that truly feels like her." He scoffed, a short, sharp sound that cut through my words. "Sentimentality is a weakness, Eleanor. Your grandmother, bless her soul, was far too indulgent. You need to learn to detach yourself from these trivialities. It's time to grow up." He walked over to the built-in bookshelf, running a finger along the spines of his leather-bound first editions, a clear signal that the conversation was, in his mind, over. But it wasn't. Not for me. The resentment simmered beneath my skin, a slow, burning fire. It wasn't just about the purse. It was about everything. His control, his endless expectations, his inability to see me as anything other than an extension of his own ambitions. I felt like a character in a play he'd written, every line, every move dictated by his script. The purse was just the latest battleground in a war that had been raging for years, a war for my own identity. "No," I said, louder this time, my voice gaining strength. He paused, his back still to me, his hand frozen on a copy of The Great Gatsby. He slowly turned, his expression a mask of disbelief. No one, especially not me, ever defied him so directly. "No?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low, a tremor of suppressed fury. "No, I won't sell it," I declared, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "It's mine, and you can't make me." The air crackled with tension. His eyes narrowed, a cold, predatory glint replacing the disbelief. This wasn't just about a purse anymore. This was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. I had, for the first time, truly stood my ground against him, and the consequences I knew would be severe. A chill ran down my spine, not just from fear but from a strange, exhilarating sense of liberation. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that my life and my relationship with my father would never be the same. This one defiant act, born from a desperate need to protect a piece of my past, had ignited a conflict that would consume us both. The air in the dining room solidified into something heavy, something I could almost taste. My father's gaze, usually so controlled, flickered with a dangerous intensity I rarely saw directed at me. He had always prided himself on his composure, his ability to negotiate and dominate any situation, but my simple refusal had chipped away at that facade. A muscle twitched in his jaw, a telltale sign of his escalating fury. I braced myself, knowing the storm was about to break. "Eleanor," he stated, his voice now a low, dangerous growl, each syllable clipped and precise. "Do you understand the implications of your defiance?" He didn't wait for an answer. "This isn't about a sentimental trinket, as you call it. This is about respect, about understanding the value of money, of opportunity. It's about your future, which I have meticulously planned for." My own breath hitched in my throat. His plans. They had always been his plans, never mine. He envisioned me as a carbon copy of himself, a ruthless financier, devoid of the very emotions he now seemed so intent on crushing. The purse, to him, was merely a symptom of my failure to conform, a symbol of my grandmother's influence, which he had always resented. Grandma Rose, with her wild stories and even wilder spirit, had been everything he wasn't. She had seen the artist in me, the dreamer, while he only saw a potential spreadsheet. "My future isn't a balance sheet, Dad," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly but holding firm. "And Grandma's bag isn't just money, it's a connection. It's who I am." His eyes narrowed, and a cold, chilling smile touched his lips. "Who you are, Eleanor, is a young woman living under my roof, benefiting from my generosity, and seemingly incapable of making sound financial decisions. Perhaps a stark reminder of reality is in order." The words hung in the silence, heavy with unspoken threats. I knew what he meant. He controlled my life, my access to funds, my very existence within those gilded walls. He had always used money as a weapon, a means of control. This was his ultimate leverage. A wave of dread washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated anger. He wouldn't just take the purse, he would try to take everything. The next morning, the reality of his threat began to unfold. My credit cards, which had always been an extension of his seemingly limitless wealth, were declined. First at the local coffee shop, then at the bookstore. Each rejection felt like a public shaming, a deliberate act of humiliation. My car, a graduation gift from him, suddenly wouldn't start. The mechanic, a man who had serviced our family's vehicles for years, gave me a sympathetic look. "Your father called, Eleanor, said to put a hold on all repairs until further notice. He was systematically dismantling my life piece by piece, isolating me. He cut off my allowance, froze my personal bank account, even canceled my phone plan." I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home, reliant on him for every basic necessity. The isolation was suffocating. Friends stopped calling, assuming I was ignoring them. My emails went unanswered. He had effectively severed every lifeline, every connection to the outside world. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of silence and simmering resentment. My father, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had changed. He would leave for his office in the city, impeccably dressed, returning in the evening to a perfectly prepared dinner, served by the house staff who now seemed to avoid my gaze. He'd sit at the head of the dining table, reading his Wall Street Journal, occasionally offering a bland, passive-aggressive comment. "Still clinging to your sentimental attachments, Eleanor? A wise investor knows when to cut their losses." Each word was a barb, designed to chip away at my resolve, to make me crack. But with each calculated blow, something within me hardened. The initial dread transformed into a cold, burning resolve. I was Eleanor Vance, and I would not break. He wanted me to conform, to surrender, to become the emotionless automaton he envisioned. But he had underestimated the power of a single act of defiance, the seed of rebellion he had unwittingly planted. One evening, unable to bear the suffocating silence of my room, I ventured downstairs. The house was quiet, the staff gone for the night. I found him in his study, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was no anger now, only a chilling satisfaction. He truly believed he had won. "Have you reconsidered, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost conciliatory. "It's not too late to make the sensible choice. To put this unfortunate period behind us." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time I saw not just my father, but the architect of my gilded cage, the man who had systematically tried to strip away every ounce of my individuality. The purse was no longer just a symbol of my grandmother. It had become a symbol of my own fight for identity, my refusal to be erased. "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor it had held days before. "I haven't reconsidered. And I won't." His smile faltered, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected me to crumble, to beg. He had expected me to be the weak, dependent daughter he had cultivated. But something had shifted. The girl who had whispered defiance was gone, replaced by a woman whose resolve was forged in the fire of his control. This wasn't just about a purse anymore. This was about everything, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the battle had only just begun. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. The defiance I'd whispered earlier had been a spark. Now, it was a slow-burning fuse. My father, still glowering by the dining table, seemed to sense the shift. His usual tactic of simply overwhelming me with his authority, of making me feel small and insignificant, wasn't working anymore. He watched me, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. The game had indeed changed, and I felt an unfamiliar thrill, a potent mix of fear and exhilaration, course through me. This wasn't just about a vintage Chanel bag anymore. It was about reclaiming myself from years of his suffocating control. I walked away from him, not storming off in a fit of childish pique, but with a deliberate, measured pace that spoke of a new kind of resolve. Each step echoed the growing chasm between us. I went to my room, the sanctuary where I'd spent countless hours dreaming of escape, and that changed everything. Sat on the edge of my bed, the Chanel bag clutched to my chest. It wasn't just fabric and leather, it was a tangible piece of my grandmother, a whisper of her strength, a reminder that I was more than just my father's daughter. The next few days were a tense standoff. He tried his usual maneuvers, cutting off my allowance, forgetting to leave the car keys, making pointed comments about my lack of ambition at dinner. Each attempt, however, felt hollow. The power had shifted subtly but undeniably. I found myself meeting his gaze, not with fear, but with a quiet challenge. I started looking for a job, not in finance as he wished, but something that would give me independence, a way out. The resentment that had simmered beneath the surface for years began to boil over, fueled by his continued attempts to control me. Every condescending remark, every thinly veiled threat, only solidified my determination. I wasn't just fighting for a purse, I was fighting for my life. One evening, I overheard him on the phone in his study, his voice hushed but agitated. Curiosity, a dangerous new trait, pulled me closer. I pressed my ear to the heavy oak door, straining to hear. "Can't believe she's being so stubborn. I need this dealt with, quickly. Before the market shifts." He mentioned a name, Mr. Thorne, and something about liquidation. My blood ran cold. Was he trying to sell the bag behind my back? The thought twisted my gut. This wasn't just control, this was a blatant act of betrayal. He wasn't just trying to make me sell it, he was actively trying to take it from me, to erase that last piece of my grandmother. The betrayal stung, sharp and immediate. The resentment I felt morphed into something colder, harder, an obsession. I became consumed with protecting the bag, with protecting my grandmother's memory, and with finding a way to truly break free from his grasp. I started researching antique dealers, not to sell the bag, but to understand its true value, its history, its significance beyond the monetary. I discovered that the specific model, a limited edition from the 1960s, was rarer than I'd ever imagined, with a provenance that included a renowned art collector. Its value wasn't just in its brand, but in its unique story, a story that mirrored my own struggle for identity. This deeper understanding only intensified my resolve. I realized that my father's fixation on the bag wasn't just about my supposed irresponsibility, it was about something far more insidious. He saw it as a symbol of my grandmother's influence, an influence he had always resented, an influence that had dared to offer me unconditional love, something he was incapable of providing. The bag wasn't just an object, it was a battleground for my soul. I started making discreet inquiries, not through my father's network, but through old friends of my grandmother. People he had dismissed as eccentric or unimportant. They spoke of her with such warmth, such admiration, painting a picture of a woman who was vibrant, independent, and fiercely protective of those she loved. They also hinted at a long-standing tension between her and my father, a silent war of wills that had simmered for decades. One friend, a retired art appraiser named Martha, offered to meet me for coffee. She had a mischievous twinkle in her eye and a reputation for knowing everything about everyone in Greenwich society. Martha listened patiently as I poured out my story, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply nodded. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Eleanor. She never did anything without a reason." She then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, your father has always been financially ambitious. Sometimes, to a fault." She paused, taking a sip of her tea. "There was a rumor years ago about a certain investment, a rather risky one, that your grandmother refused to back. It caused quite a rift." My mind reeled. Could the bag be connected to this old family secret? The thought ignited a new fire in me, a burning need for answers. The game had indeed changed, and I was no longer just playing defense. I was ready to go on the offensive. This wasn't just about personal freedom anymore, it was about uncovering the truth, about seeking a deeper justice. The revelation about my grandmother's will, about the purse being tied to a significant inheritance my father had seemingly suppressed, hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the money, though that was certainly a shock. It was the sheer audacity of his deception, the depth of his calculated manipulation. He hadn't just wanted me to sell the bag, he had wanted to erase a crucial piece of my grandmother's legacy, a legacy that was meant for me. This wasn't just a disagreement over a sentimental item. This was a calculated betrayal, a deliberate act of emotional and financial sabotage. My resentment, already a simmering cauldron, began to boil over, transforming into something far more potent, an unyielding obsession. I dove headfirst into old documents, sifting through yellowed papers and faded photographs in the attic, searching for any scrap of information that could corroborate what Aunt Carol had hinted at. My dad had always kept a meticulously organized home office, every file labeled, every record accounted for. He prided himself on his transparency, a word that now tasted like ash in my mouth. Yet, as I secretly combed through his locked study late one night, a chill snaked down my spine. Tucked away in a false bottom of a dusty old filing cabinet, behind tax returns from decades past, I found it. A thick, legal-sized envelope, unmarked, its contents whispering secrets. My hands trembled as I pulled out the documents. There it was, in stark, undeniable legal jargon, a codicil to my grandmother Rose's will, explicitly stating that upon her passing, a trust would be established for me, Eleanor Vance, funded by the sale of specific assets, including her vintage Chanel bag. The trust was to be administered by her executor, my father, with distributions to commence on my 25th birthday, provided I still possess the bag. If the bag was sold before then, the funds would revert to his control, to be used at his discretion. He had not only suppressed the information, but he had actively tried to coerce me into selling the very key to my financial independence. He wasn't just being difficult, he was actively trying to control my future, using my grandmother's memory as a weapon. A searing heat spread through my chest, a mixture of profound sadness and righteous fury. My grandmother, the only person who truly understood me, had tried to secure my future, to give me a measure of freedom from my father's suffocating control. And he, in his insatiable need for power, had systematically dismantled her final wish. The betrayal was so complete, so cold-blooded, it left me breathless. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the desecration of a loving memory, the deliberate undermining of my grandmother's profound love for me. I spent the next few days in a haze, the weight of this knowledge pressing down on me. I couldn't look at my father without seeing a stranger, a man capable of such calculated cruelty. His usual pronouncements about my irresponsibility and lack of financial acumen now rang hollow, dripping with hypocrisy. He wasn't trying to teach me a lesson, he was trying to keep me dependent, to keep me under his thumb. The resentment I felt morphed into a steely resolve. I would not let him get away with this. My grandmother deserved better, and so did I. The confrontation was inevitable, but I knew I couldn't go in unprepared. I needed more than just the codicil. I needed an airtight case, something that would leave him no room for denial. I called Aunt Carol, feigning casual interest in family history, subtly probing for more details about my grandmother's final wishes, about any conversations she might have had with my father regarding the will. Aunt Carol, ever the unwitting ally, provided a trove of anecdotes, recalling my grandmother's excitement about Eleanor's future, and vague references to provisions she'd made. It was enough to paint a picture, to show a pattern of behavior. One evening, as my father sat engrossed in the stock market reports, his usual evening ritual, I approached him. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a silent battle already underway. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my resolve was unwavering. "Dad," I began, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched into fists behind my back. "We need to talk about Grandma Rose's will." He slowly lowered his newspaper. His eyes, usually so sharp, now held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, perhaps, or a dawning realization. "What about it, Eleanor?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral, but I could hear the subtle shift, the tightening of his jaw. I laid the envelope on the polished mahogany table between us, the legal documents stark against the dark wood. "This," I said, pushing the codicil towards him. "This codicil, the one you conveniently forgot to mention." His face, usually so composed, paled slightly. He picked up the document, his gaze scanning the familiar legal text. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the frantic drumming of my own heart. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I saw not just anger but a flicker of something akin to fear. The mask of the infallible patriarch was beginning to crack. This wasn't just about personal freedom anymore, it was about uncovering the truth, about seeking a deeper justice. The game had indeed changed, and I, Eleanor Vance, was ready to play for keeps. The email landed in my father's inbox, with the quiet precision of a predator. Each word a carefully placed stone in the path I had meticulously laid. I watched his face as he read it, a silent observer in the drama I had orchestrated. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly at the corner of his mouth. The familiar scent of his expensive cologne, usually a symbol of his untouchable authority, now seemed to mock him, clinging to the air around his growing discomfort. He looked up from his computer screen, his eyes, usually so sharp and unyielding, now held a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly, but a profound disorientation. The perfectly coiffed hair, the bespoke suit, the aura of control he so meticulously cultivated, all seemed to waver under the weight of the digital document I had sent. "Eleanor," he began, his voice surprisingly subdued, lacking its usual commanding edge. "What is this?" I met his gaze, my own eyes unwavering. "It's the truth, Dad. Or at least, the beginning of it." The document detailed the intricate web of shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the conveniently lost assets, all meticulously unearthed from the digital detritus he thought he had so expertly scrubbed. It wasn't just about the money he'd siphoned from Grandma Rose's trust, the trust meant for me, but the systematic way he'd manipulated her finances in her final, vulnerable years. The evidence was irrefutable, compiled with the help of a very discreet, very expensive forensic accountant I'd hired using the last of my own savings. Every late night spent poring over digital ledgers, every suppressed memory of his dismissive tone, every tear shed over the loss of my grandmother and the subsequent betrayal had fueled this meticulous excavation. He slammed his hand on the desk, a sudden burst of his old fury, but it lacked conviction. "This is slander, fabrication." "You'll be ruined, Eleanor, you hear me? Ruined?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Ruined? Dad, you've been trying to ruin me my entire life. You tried to mold me into your image, to erase every part of me that wasn't a reflection of your ambition. You told me my dreams were frivolous, my emotions a weakness. You even tried to take away the last tangible piece of Grandma Rose, the only person who ever truly saw me." I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. "But I'm not ruined. I'm just free." His face, usually so composed, began to contort. The mask of the infallible patriarch was not just cracking, it was shattering. He looked like a man watching his entire world crumble, a world built on carefully constructed lies and unchallenged authority. He had always been so certain of his power, so sure that he could dictate my life, control my choices, because I was dependent on him. He had never anticipated that I, his frivolous daughter, would turn his own weapons against him. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled, though his voice trembled slightly. "I'm still your father, Eleanor, and you're still my daughter." "No," I stated, my voice clear and steady. "You are the man who tried to steal my inheritance, who tried to erase my grandmother's legacy, and who consistently chose money and control over love and family. And I am Eleanor Vance, a woman who is finally reclaiming what is rightfully hers." I presented him with the second document, a legal brief outlining the lawsuit I intended to file, complete with a detailed account of the financial improprieties, and a request for a full accounting of Grandma Rose's estate. It wasn't about the money anymore, not entirely. It was about the principle, about justice, about finally making him acknowledge the damage he had inflicted. The legal brief was a declaration of war, but one fought with precision and strategy, not raw emotion. He snatched the papers, his eyes scanning the legal jargon, his face paling with each paragraph. He knew, just as I knew, that the evidence was overwhelming. The carefully constructed facade of his impeccable reputation, the one he had guarded so fiercely, was about to be exposed for what it truly was, a hollow shell. The fear I had seen earlier was now a stark, undeniable terror. "You wouldn't," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You wouldn't do this to your own father. You left me no choice, Dad," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "You forced my hand when you tried to take away the last piece of Grandma Rose, when you refused to see me as anything more than an extension of your own ambition. This isn't just about the money, it's about reclaiming my narrative, my identity, my worth." I watched him, truly watched him, as the full weight of his predicament settled upon him. The man who had always been so formidable, so utterly in control, now looked small and defeated. The silence that followed was different from the tense silences of our past arguments. This one was heavy with the irreversible consequences of his actions and the dawning realization of his impending downfall. The game had indeed changed, and I, Eleanor Vance, had played for keeps and won. The closure I sought wouldn't be sweet, but it would be mine. The finality of that moment settled over me, a quiet, potent triumph. Watching my dad, The man who had always been so meticulously composed, so utterly in control, now looked small and defeated, was a different kind of victory than I had ever imagined. The silence that followed was different from the tense silences of our past arguments. This one was heavy with the irreversible consequences of his actions, and the dawning realization of his impending downfall. The game had indeed changed, and I, Eleanor Vance, had played for keeps and won. The closure I sought wouldn't be sweet, but it would be mine. The legal proceedings that followed were a blur of cold, hard facts and colder, harder emotions. Each document filed, each testimony given, chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of my father's life. I sat through it all, a silent observer, a witness to the unraveling of a man who had once seemed invincible. There were no grand pronouncements from me, no dramatic confrontations in court. My revenge wasn't about shouting or accusing, it was about the quiet, methodical dismantling of the empire he had built on a foundation of control and conditional love. The truth, once unleashed, had a power far greater than any spoken word. I watched as the weight of his decisions crushed him, not with a sense of glee, but with a profound, weary sadness. This wasn't the catharsis I had once craved, the explosive release of years of pent-up resentment. Instead, it was a slow, deliberate process, like watching a sandcastle erode with each tide. He lost his position, his reputation, and eventually, the very house we stood in, the gilded cage that had defined my youth. The irony was not lost on me. The man who had demanded I sell my most cherished possession for financial gain ended up losing everything due to his own financial misdeeds. The day the house was officially sold, I drove past it. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by a new family's vibrant potted plants on the porch. It looked different, lighter somehow, no longer burdened by the heavy atmosphere of expectation and disappointment. I felt nothing but a quiet sense of detachment. The emotional ties had been severed long ago, replaced by a steely resolve that had carried me through the darkest days. My father was gone from that house, and so was the version of Eleanor who had lived there, constantly seeking his approval. With the legal battles behind me, I found myself standing at a crossroads, the future stretching out, undefined but full of possibility. The Chanel bag, Grandma Rose's bag, was still with me. It wasn't just a symbol of defiance anymore. It was a testament to resilience, a reminder of the unwavering love that had always been present, even when I couldn't see it. It represented the part of me that had refused to break, the spirit that had fought for its own truth. I started taking art classes, something I had always dreamed of but never pursued under my father's watchful eye. The canvas became my new language, a space where I could express the raw emotions, the quiet victories, and the lingering echoes of a past that had shaped me. Each brushstroke was a release, a step further away from the shadows of my upbringing. I wasn't painting for anyone's approval, only for myself. One afternoon, a few months after the dust had settled, I received a letter. It was from my father. His handwriting, usually so precise, was shaky and uneven. He didn't apologize, not in the way I had once yearned for. Instead, he wrote about the emptiness he felt, the regret that had finally caught up to him. He admitted, in his own convoluted way, that he had been wrong, that his pursuit of what he perceived as success had cost him more than he could ever imagine. There was a faint glimmer of understanding in his words, a recognition of the damage he had inflicted. I read the letter once, then placed it in a drawer with old photographs and forgotten mementos. I didn't need his apology to heal, nor did I need his regret to validate my choices. My journey had been about reclaiming myself, about finding my own voice, my own path, independent of his expectations. The closure I had sought wasn't about his suffering, it was about my liberation. Life began to blossom in ways I never thought possible. I found a small apartment in a vibrant part of the city, filled with light and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. I surrounded myself with people who saw me, truly saw Eleanor, for who I was, not for who I was supposed to be. There were no grand gestures of reconciliation with my father. no dramatic forgiveness. Our relationship remained fractured, a landscape of broken trust and unspoken words, but I had made peace with that. The revenge I had once envisioned as a fiery explosion had instead been a slow, deliberate reconstruction of myself. It was the quiet strength I found in my own independence, the joy I discovered in pursuing my passions, the unwavering belief in my own worth. The Chanel bag, once a symbol of contention, now sat proudly on my dresser, a beautiful, cherished object. It was no longer just Grandma Rose's. It was mine. It was a reminder that even in the face of immense pressure, I had held on to what truly mattered, and in doing so, I had finally found my freedom. My story, Eleanor's story, was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had chosen to build for myself. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, every eye on me as I walked to the stand. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. This wasn't just about the purse anymore. It was about every slight, every dismissal, every time my father had chosen his image over my well-being. This was about finally reclaiming my voice. I looked at him, seated at the defense table, his face a mask of indignation. He still believed he was untouchable, that his charm and connections would always win. That arrogant certainty fueled my resolve. I took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and stale air filling my lungs, and began to speak. It started small, I testified, my voice surprisingly steady. Little things. My opinions were dismissed. My feelings, irrelevant. My father always said it was for my own good, but it was always for his. Then came the purse. I recounted the story, the details sharp and clear in my mind, the lavish gift, the sudden demand for its return, the humiliation, and his absolute refusal to see my pain. I described how his insistence on maintaining appearances, on controlling every aspect of my life, had driven me to a breaking point. I spoke of the years of emotional manipulation, the subtle ways he had chipped away at my self-worth, making me believe I was difficult, ungrateful, never enough. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the revelation I'd meticulously uncovered. The truth about the purse, I stated, my gaze fixed on the jury, was never about money. It was about power. My father had promised that purse to his business partner's daughter weeks before he gifted it to me. It was a manipulative ploy to control me, to test my obedience, and to ensure I wouldn't embarrass him in front of his elite circle. A gasp rippled through the gallery. His face, usually so composed, flickered with genuine shock. He hadn't expected me to dig that deep, to expose his carefully constructed facade. The cross-examination was brutal, his lawyer painting me as an unhinged, rebellious daughter, driven by spite. But I stood firm, armed with the truth, with the documented evidence of his financial dealings, the emails, the carefully cross-referenced dates. Each question they threw at me, I met with a calm, reasoned answer, dissecting their lies with surgical precision. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for every person he had ever manipulated, every secret he had buried. When the verdict came, the word guilty echoed through the silent courtroom, a resounding gong of vindication. My father's face crumpled, the mask finally falling away to reveal a man stripped bare. It wasn't just the legal defeat, it was the public humiliation, the shattering of his carefully cultivated image. He had always valued reputation above all else, and I had taken that from him. Leaving the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter. The weight I had carried for so long had finally lifted. The revenge wasn't sweet in the way I had imagined, not a triumphant roar, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. Justice had been served, not just for the purse, but for a lifetime of emotional tyranny. The path to healing was long, but I walked it with a new sense of purpose. I started therapy, began to unravel the complex knots of resentment and self-doubt he had woven into my psyche. I reconnected with friends and family members he had isolated me from, slowly rebuilding a support system based on genuine affection, not control. The bitterness that had consumed me began to recede, replaced by a quiet strength. I learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own worth, independent of anyone else's approval. The purse, once a symbol of my subjugation, became a reminder of my resilience, a testament to the power of finding your voice. It had cost me dearly, but in losing my father, I had finally found myself.